the content in
this meeting is being recorded
in new scenarios and in your own school context as well. So let's have a little look at the outcomes of this clinic then. Please take about 20 to 30 seconds to have a little glance over the slide, have a little look at the outcomes. We are going to focus on parts of the course of study during this clinic. It's deliberate to do that so that we can focus a little bit more in depth at certain areas that leaders will make. This means that not all areas of the course content will be covered. The parts that will be covered today, that does not mean that they are not the most important, that they're not the most important ones, and that the area that we do not look at today, that doesn't mean that is less important. So let's start by recapping what we encountered on this course. Faye.
Okay then, so in this next section, I have pre-warned you, we're going to be recapping some of the key aspects of the course. So yeah, we don't have time to cover everything in the course in this clinic. So yeah, as we've already mentioned, we're just going to recap the module principles across the course and then look at some of the particular ones that we're going to focus on in this clinic. Okay, so I'm going to give you some retrieval questions. Now, these are in your course workbook, but what I would like you to do is just spend a minute or two now just going through and thinking what your answers are. So the first one, a theory of change should start by considering A, the school funds, B, the school's vision and aims, C, the number of pupils in the school. So if you just want to select the correct answer there. Then you need to list 2 ways in which teachers can manage pupils' cognitive load. So just add in 2 answers. And then finally, to encourage pupils to develop good learning habits, teachers should, and again, just select the correct option. So just 2 minutes for you to just work through those. Okay, just 30 more seconds. Okay then, so in chat, if you could type in what you think is the correct answer for number 1, so out of A, B or C. Brilliant. So most of you are going for B, so that's the correct answer. But yeah, so whilst all of them are important, you have to think about, 1 second, just finds in my notes, there we go. Yes, you've just got to think about how is everything being aligned to the school's vision and values. So you may look at funds, obviously, if you want to run a specific intervention before anything is improved. Okay, what about the second one then? So we're going to do a little bit of cold call here because there's a number of different answers. So Sarah Swindles, can you tell me one of the things that you've listed for that?
It's ways in which teachers can manage cognitive load, prompts, instructions and templates.
Yeah, brilliant. Jenny Jones, can you tell me something which you've put down?
I've put few key ideas for pupils to process.
Yeah, excellent. And Olivia Halai?
I've put sort of like a clear content for the lesson, broken into small steps as to not overload the children all at once.
Yeah, fantastic. So all of those are great answers. So it could be anything from scaffolding, giving worked examples, breaking down teaching into those small component parts, simplifying the instructions or simplifying the task, reducing split attention or reducing that redundant information. Okay, and then finally, for number 3, again, if you can put the correct answer into chat. Yeah, excellent. So everyone's putting down A. So if we're going to be encouraging pupils to develop good learning habits, teachers should outline and model behaviour expectations and praise success. Okay then, so just moving on. I'm going to give you just a minute, well, not even that, just to read that first sentence about what module principles are. Okay, so module principles are taken from statements and then condensed down into sort of helpful ways of thinking, which then would allow more effective decisions to be made. Okay, so they're phrased so that they're memorable. That's the point of the way which they've been written. Okay, so they are sort of needs-based as a module principle on the implementation course. That's been generated from the framework statements on the slide. Okay, so it's a way for leaders to think about implementation that can be applied across different situations and contexts. So this might look a little bit different when applied in your situation where you work, but it's still a helpful rule of thumb and therefore worth us all learning regardless of our context. Okay, so what we'll do now is we'll just have a little look at the ones which we're going to be looking at during this clinic. Okay, so if you can just have a little look to go through the module principles that we've covered during the course in your workbook. And then as you read, I want you to just make a note of the ones that you found particularly, well, the ones that you focused on particularly during the course. Okay, and then afterwards, I'm going to get you to share a couple of the ones that you focused on and what you've done. So maybe you've done extra reading, maybe you reviewed a document. What is it that you've done to sort of focus on it? Now, a lot of what we're doing at the moment is not necessarily going to have impacted you in your school as of yet. Okay, it is much more about understanding. So it's likely that perhaps you've read more about it, or maybe you've just applied that way of thinking. So when you're sort of going through your answers, you know, what have you done to try and understand that more rather than a focus on the implementation of it? Okay, so I'm just going to give you a minute or two just to have a think through of that, and then I'll be again cold calling for you to give me some of your answers. course handbook, if you haven't got it, is available on Step Lab, and it has been emailed out recently to you as well if you're unable to find it. Okay then, so I'm just going to call some of you so that I can get your responses. So Bruno, which of you focused on and why, and what have you done?
In terms of simple model of memory, Angela, who I work with in my school, we've delivered some CPD to our joint department, which is MFL and Humanities. So we've worked in first term on managing the cognitive load.
Mm-hmm.
We've delivered training around how to limit the cognitive overload on the slide. So it's really bringing either animation or removing all the extraneous kind of information that was there. And that's actually already been quite impactful on the whole department across both areas. We've already seen, there's still a bit of work to be done, but we've already seen an impact on that. We've also been focusing on clear and concise instructions. So there's been quite a lot of deliberate practice as well around that. We've been very lucky in the sense that we were able to get the staff buying, which was really, really important to us, because we've got quite a lot of very experienced staff as well with us. So it was kind of trying to juggle, like not teach them how to suck eggs, but at the same time getting them on board. And that's been really, really, really successful and really important. As far as the theory of change is concerned, I'm looking at more and more the evidence-informed, making changes in terms of assessment and how we are doing that in LFL in collaboration with the head of department.
Yeah, that sounds brilliant, Bruno. Yeah, and you're certainly working through all of those principles really well there. So is it Kelly O'Malley?
Hi.
Hi, would you be able to share with us a little bit about what ones you've been focusing on, how you found out more, or how you've applied it?
To be honest, I found the simple model of memory one easier. So if I start with that one and then come back to the theory of change, if that's okay.
Yes.
Because I've just taken over the role of English in school, so it's been a bit tricky to sort of implement anything. So with the simple model of memory, I looked at the prioritising retrieval and practice. So I read through all of the information like the Teach Like a Champion, and from that picked out some things that we were going to try in year 6 in our day-to-day practice and see the impact that that has on the children. We found that that's been really positive, and we've shared that with other members of staff in school. So things like doing the low stake quizzes, we've found particularly useful, trying to get the children ready for the SATs, and we're trying to include it as part of our everyday practice now. Through our school, we've also been doing some work looking at the digital strategy, and we've looked at brain dumps and the use of the hinge questions, which run alongside what we've been doing as part of this course, and the children are really engaged with it. So I think we've done the brain dumps every day this week, and they're finding it really useful, and every time we come back to it, they're so happy that they're remembering more. And again, the use of the hinge questions has worked really well. I had an observation earlier on in the week and tried that with my RE lesson, and didn't move the children on until I knew that they'd secured that understanding. And the children really think it's a really effective strategy as well, because he said, why would you move on when you're teaching if you haven't got it? So they acknowledge as well when we're using it in a maths lesson, for example. In terms of the culture and behaviour, I looked at the establishing routines. So I shared with the head teacher and the deputy head the idea of the reset day, which I really liked from the reading that I did. And we tried that with year 6 when we returned after Christmas. And we reaped the benefits because they've come back really engaged, they're on task, we're not having to waste times with those trivial things from day to day where we're focusing on other things that are not the actual learning. And I do use it on a daily basis. So I was on my PPA this morning, for example, and came back in after lunch and they're a bit rowdy. So I sent them back out again and, you know, did a bit of a reset then there with them and the expectations for them. And I just feel that that really works well with the class that I've got, because they are quite a challenging class in terms of the behaviour for learning at the moment. The theory of change one I have found tricky. I looked at the needs base and had a look at the problems within English throughout Key Stage 2. But at the moment, before sort of looking for a solution, it's quite hard because all the directions coming from the head teacher and the deputy, and we're implementing lots of other things in school. So I've not really been able to do anything with that, even though I am aware of things I would like to do in the future.
Yeah, and in a sense, it's about managing that cognitive load as well for yourself, in terms of if you've got other things which, you know, you're trying to do at the same time, about taking a step back and going, right, well, I've got the knowledge of this, let's park that for now and let's, you know, focus on what we're doing. So, but yeah, again, similar to Bruno, it sounds as though you're really doing well at, you know, getting your head around these concepts and then beginning to put them into practice. So that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're just going to move on now, just to have a little think about the ones we're going to focus on, particularly in this clinic. So I'm just going to give you a minute just to have a read through of that slide. And you'll see that they're only focused on some of the modules in the course. And that's deliberate. We, you know, want to do some deep thinking about these today in regard to some specific scenarios. So yeah, we're just going to focus on these ones for today. But it's not to give the impression that anything's less or more important. It's just to allow you to go through these. So just a minute, just to have a read. Okay, so yeah, these are the ones which we're going to be focused on during this clinic, and we're going to move on now to an I do section to demonstrate how we're going to use these as part of our clinic today.
Okay, so we're going to start the I do section in a moment. A reminder that the scenario we're going to look at is fictional, but a realistic example of a leader's experience. We as facilitators are going to model the I do, and then we'll get a quick brew after the I do section, and then we'll move on to the we do section, where you'll be able to bring that knowledge to a different scenario. It is important that you do have the workbook for this, because there are 2 scenarios that we are going to read in a moment. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes to read the module principle tables in scenario 1. It is on page 6 in your workbook. As you read, have the module principles in mind first and foremost, and think about the additional knowledge you can bring to the scenario that may be useful to think about how we can help solve this problem that we're looking at. If you do finish, read the question on the slide below that you can see on there, and start to annotate your initial thoughts. Okay, so I'm going to give you 5 minutes now to have a read on page 6 and 7 of your workbook. go just less than a minute before we work through it together. Okay, before I hand over, check I'm not on mute. Oh, before I hand over to Jay, we're going to go through the module principles that Faye spoke about. A green tick next to a module principle signifies that a leader in the scenario may be using the principle effectively, and a red question mark means that they may not be using this principle effectively. The majority of the principles covered in the scenarios will be effectively covered. Only one or two could be applied better. And between myself and Jay, with input from Faye and Linda where appropriate, we're going to do this I do section and model the response to how the leader is doing. Over to you, Jay.
Hello everyone, apologies if it's a bit echoey. I basically picked the nicest wall in my house and it's the kitchen at the moment, so if it's a bit echoey, I do apologise. Links to prior knowledge here. I think this has been really successful for this leader. She's really considered prior knowledge because she's been able to identify the area of development through assessments, learning walks and discussions with pupils. She's got a really good rounded view of the issue in school and how she starting to think about how she wants to tackle it. She discusses with the Key Stage 2 leader, and I think that's a really good idea. The Key Stage 2 leader clearly has an approach that's working for his area of school, and she uses it to start springboarding her own ideas from as well. I think she's organised that really well though. Sometimes it's quite easy to jump on a bandwagon. Somebody's got a great idea and you just want to apply it straight away. But she's got this rounded understanding and she's got a careful consideration and a plan how she wants to tackle this. She also understands how invaluable it is to activate prior knowledge as well. She understands that complex learning needs building up in small steps, and through clarity with through a team meeting, emphasising how it's going to support the learning, she's got a really good idea in how she's going to activate that prior knowledge for children and how staff are going to develop it as well.
Thank you, Jay. Anything you want to add on there, Faye?
No, but I do remember that when we were doing our initial conference, we talked quite a lot there about starter tasks. And I remember, you know, people sort of sharing ideas about what they do in terms of activating that prior knowledge as part of their starter of the lesson to really set pupils up then for that new learning.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and the responses you got previously as well. Some of the participants and leaders there spoke about activating that prior knowledge, and that brings me nicely onto the next principle, which was that prioritize, retrieval and practice. And again, this leader has done this really, really well. She's identified, firstly identifies that pupils' retrieval of prior knowledge is weak, but instead of just leaving it there, she's then come up with a strategy to overcome this. Starter tasks that we've spoken about previously are really supportive here and are going to develop pupils' fluency and recall of content. It is remembering that children need to remember more and no more. And that's why we do the job we do. Another quote that I always use is practice makes permanent. And if children can move that knowledge from their working into the long-term memory, it becomes a lot more automatic. And at the conference, we spoke about doing things automatic. And when pupils do that, it becomes embedded in what they do. At my school, I've got an example here. Pupils complete Flashback 4 at the start of each maths lesson. Flashback 4 is a white rose maths activity. And the beauty of this is it allows retrieval of previous learning. They've got a question on the previous lesson, they've got a question on the previous week, a question on the previous unit, and a question on the previous term. So every single day, they're looking back at previous learning to build those foundation blocks. And again, we also use learning by questions in LBQ to do that retrieval practice in the foundation subjects. And that includes spaced retrieval as well. And this helps to ensure that those essential skills are regularly visited to strengthen that retention. Linda, is there anything you'd like to add there?
Yeah, I think the phrase that I quite like on the slide that's being shown at the minute is that re-exposure. And I think what's really important to note is that retrieval and that practice is not just the pupils being retaught and being re-exposed to the content. It is them accessing the content in a different way. So when you think about the scenario, you can think about how she then uses kind of that low stakes questioning at the beginning of the lesson, rather than just saying, here's what we did yesterday, have a quick look. But you're just bringing that content in. And what I really think is really effective is that it's recall and retrieval for the teacher daily and not just the pupils. And then you're kind of getting that misconceptions like targeted all of the time, but you're actually getting that deeper subject knowledge as well.
Brilliant, thank you, Linda. And moving on to the next principle, which is the established routines. Over to you, Jay.
I think she's been really effective in two ways here, both in the classroom, considering routine in the classroom, and introducing it to staff. Where I work at Gorsfield, our children often come from quite chaotic lives and home lives, so coming into school, routine is vital, and I'm sure all of you will appreciate having really firm routines in your classroom and around school has a great impact, not just on education, but in so many other ways too. I think one way the leader wants this routine embedded, and it's that idea that it's contributing to this focused start of a lesson. So it's this calm engagement, children are maximising that learning time. We haven't got chaos of books being fired around and children trying to find their places. There's a clear routine of what children are expected to do. And of course, having really high expectations of that is vital as well. Again, similar to what Andy said, we use flashback 4s as well at Gorsfield, and children arrive at 8:45 and they're on their tables ready to go. So the expectation is in that 10-minute window, as children are making their way into school, they complete it 5 to 9. The teacher will go through it, ready for the start of the maths lesson. It's great for reactivating prior learning, brings it into the working memory. Lessons are really carefully sequenced in small steps, so anything children can re-access, it brings it into the next session. Children are invigorated, the learning's at the forefront of their mind, and they're ready to start that session in a calm, really dependable manner. I also think that the expectations at the start of tasks, this leader's really thought about how the routines are set, and she breaks down how they are done to her team. So actually, I think here it's really important to say she doesn't just consider the children as learners, but the adults as learners too. She breaks it down into small steps, probably is not to scare them too much, but give them a chance to really understand what she wants to set for her school. The model is practiced, she gives it support. Nobody really likes doing the role play things, situations at courses and things like that, but actually it's really useful to get the vocabulary and the language working really effectively. We're undergoing lots of curriculum enhancement at Gorsfield, and I'm sure many of you are too, but we also give our staff plenty of time to practice those routines with each other. A recent example is we did a session about how our staff and our subject leaders can communicate their subjects more effectively, and we use the PI model: provision, impact, example. So anybody part of challenge partners will be really familiar with that as a model too. But we gave a chance for our staff to practice that with each other, giving them a range of scenarios where they could be asked a question about curriculum or their subject and how they would give a clear, concise answer to it. It's awkward at first, but being put in that situation, practicing it in a low stakes, non-threatening kind of environment is really supportive too. So I think the leader has definitely earned a green tick here. I think she's really thought about establishing a routine both in the classroom and how she's introduced it to her staff at the meeting as well.
Well, thank you, Jay. I really like the idea of that pie. Not used it, but I've heard about it before, so it might be something that I delve into even more. Faye, is there anything you'd like to add on that?
Yeah, so just to give a sort of secondary twist to it, in our school, we do something called the door to do now. And it's all about, again, these routines of how do we get pupils into the classroom, sat down, focusing on that starter activity. And, you know, we have sort of clear routines. They enter in silence, they take their equipment out, put it on the desk. They dress the chair, we call it, so they put their coat on the back of the chair, and then they sit down, and whatever the starter task is has to be something that doesn't require them to be speaking to you, because then that allows the teacher to focus on things like taking the register, welcoming people in a nice friendly rather than a flustered manner. So yeah, that's just a secondary version, I think, of what perhaps you've been talking about.
That's brilliant, Faye. Yeah, and it's great to have that secondary perspective as well, and something, you know, primary teachers can learn from as well, as we spot that transition, especially for those year 5, 6 pupils. Brilliant. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next principle, which is ensuring whole school alignment. Something jumps out on that first line, and it's consistency. And, you know, consistency is key, something that I absolutely love. And I know, as you know, leaders of the future, I know you'll want that within your departments and across your units and areas that you lead. Something else that's coming out in this is communication. She's done this, he or she has done this really well, communicating those expectations to making sure it's really aligned across the classrooms. Not only does she speak to the Key Stage 2, but also the Key Stage 1 staff as well, to make sure that that transition from year 2 to 3 in this scenario is really clear, so the children are confident and prepared for those starter activities. An example at one of our schools is in the morning, and that morning activity. Building on what Jay said, we do it slightly different, but with the same outcome, or the same expected outcome. As soon as children enter in the morning, they pick up their iPads in Key Stage 2 and start morning maths, we call it, using Learning by Questions, which is an online platform. By 9 o'clock each morning, we answer over 5,000 questions across our Key Stage 2 classrooms, and that's before a lesson has even started. All these are basic skill facts, non-negotiable expectations, but also building on the previous day learning. In Key Stage 1, they start this earlier using number facts and bonds. So it's a similar process done slightly different to practice that basic skills and facts. And it means the whole school is consistent from the start of the day. And what it also does is set those expectations of learning and behaviour learning from the day, because the children don't have that time to, you know, mess around and not be really focused on the day ahead. Linda, is there anything you'd like to add on this one?
Oh, I echo what you said about consistency. It's one of my favourite words. And I've got 2 of my staff on this call, and I'm sure that they'll be looking at each other now and nodding. One of the things that Ofsted said to us during our inspection was that consistency is the golden thread through school, and that's just key in everything that we do. So it comes to paperwork, if it comes to one of the examples for consistency across departments for us would be our learning environments, and then we have that non-negotiables about what we expect in a Key Stage 1 classroom and how that progresses through Key Stage 2, so that staff have got, for example, in maths, they know what number line to put in Key Stage 1 and how that will show that progress through each of the Key Stage 2 classes, and how actually then our subject leaders need to look down into early years and see where the foundation is and how that grows. But it's consistency, consistency, consistency.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And over to our final principle, to Jay and Faye.
Yeah, where do we start with this one? It was the first thing when I was thinking about cognitive load. The leader's done so well, but at this stage, I think she probably hasn't really carefully considered the cognitive load of both her pupils and her teachers. Start off with the staff. She shares the routine, which is fine. She shares exactly what she needs to do, but there's just so many details to it. You can imagine that reaction you would have in a staff room or a staff meeting if somebody gave you that checklist at the start of a lesson before any learning took place. In the fast world of teaching that we live in, it's just so unlikely you would follow all of those steps. it's monitoring it, maintaining it. It's just so tricky. It's an unnecessary distraction to the learning of that lesson. And the main objective, we're there for learning. Too many steps, it's being micromanaged. Similarly for pupils as well, it's also a great distraction from learning. There's so much to think about. An example I kind of put myself in is if I walked into a Key Stage 1 writing lesson. I walked into Year 2 today, walked into a Year 2 English lesson. Children writing from a young age are grappling with spelling, punctuation, keeping up with their beautiful handwriting, features of a text presentation, let alone a checklist of 13 to 14 ideas before they even get to that point. It's quite interesting as we read along that I'm not surprised many staff and pupils are following this. It's too much to manage within that pace of teaching, and more consideration is definitely needed at that point.
Thank you. And on to you, Faye.
So with this one, like in a sense, I love the list. Like we have lists for a lot of different things. So when I talk to you about the door to do now, it's actually on our doors of our classrooms. So the expectation is we stand sort of half in, half out, as we call it. And the list is then on the door. So that you can be reminding pupils to, take the coats off, dress the chair, get the equipment out, enter in silence. But it's literally 4 points. That's it. But even 4 points, it's still worth having as a list somewhere that's accessible, just to remind you. And it also, reinforces it to the pupils that that's the expectation. And then you can think about, well, what's the utility of that for perhaps other things? So as you go in through, we're talking about chunking it. And, again, use visual prompts, have things which will allow pupils to see what those different chunks actually are. But just making sure that it's not however many points that was on that list, that was just far too many.
A lot, wasn't it? Thank you very much for that, Faye and Jay. So we've now gone through the I do section, and it's now time to maybe reflect on the way we've gone through that scenario using the module principles. Whilst you do that, and if you do have any questions, please pop them in the chat. We're just going to stop for 5 minutes. It does say 10 minutes on screen, but if we can all be back for 5 past, if you want to grab yourself a quick brew or a drink, at 5 past 5, we will move on to the we do section, which is the final part, but it'll also allow you to apply the module principles to a scenario. So see you at 5 past 5. If you did join us late, please pop your name into the chat just so we can use it for today's register. Yeah, that was just if you joined us late, just pop your full name into the chat, just so we can use it for today's register. Thank you. Thank you, Zara. Okay, it's now 5:05, and we'll move on to the We Do section, which Linda and Faye will be taking us through.
Thank you. Okie doke, we just have a little think. We're going to have spent about 40 minutes now on the We Do section. We're going to dedicate this time to read and record and think about and reflect on those module principles on the next given scenario. So if you can get to page 12 on your workbooks, that's what we're going to have a little look at first. Before we do so, in this section, we're going to look at this next scenario. It is similar, and we will use the same module principles. It will demonstrate the leader's decision making around those principles. On the slide, you will see how the We Do section will be split up. In a moment, you're going to have 10 minutes to read and record your analysis of the scenario independently. And you should take the same approach that was modelled to you in the I Do section. If you note now, there is a separate question for you to consider if you finished analysing within the times. We have section number 1 with A and B, and now we have section 2. How have you used, or how do you anticipate using one or more module principles in your decision making, in your roles, in your context? So if you do finish within the time, there's another strand for you to start thinking about your own individual context as well. This question has been chosen to encourage you to think about those contexts that you are each in and how those principles could apply to your own settings. By doing this, you will develop your mental models of the ways in which these principles can be used in different decision making. So we now have 10 minutes to read and analyse. Again, it's page 12 on your workbook. Please do this independently, and after the 10 minutes, we will come back and we will reflect on what we need to do next. So page 12, read the scenario, think about the principles, make some notes, and then there is that second strand of questioning for you to think about if you've got additional time. Thanks, guys. So about 2 minutes left, everyone. Okay, thank you everyone. We're going to pass over to Faye for the next bit.
Okay, so what we're going to do next is we're going to allow you some time to discuss what you've been writing and to share your answers with some other people. Now, this says we do share in pairs. We're actually going to do this in small groups of 4 in breakout rooms. So what I'd like you to do is just to pay some attention to perhaps any areas of uncertainty or areas that you disagree with when you're actually discussing some of your answers, and then we can discuss these as a wider group afterwards. Okay, it'd be really helpful as well if for after we've done the breakout rooms, if you can perhaps decide on one person from your group who's going to share with the wider group afterwards. Okay, so I'll be opening the breakout rooms in just a moment. You should be automatically put into your breakout room. Okay, and we'll be able to pop into the rooms as well, just to hear some of what you're talking about and to see if there's been any sort of misunderstandings or things that we think would be particularly useful for us to pick up on. Okay, so I'll put you into those breakout rooms now.
Just like that.
That was good timing. My dog has been going mental for the last 10 minutes.
It's flowed quite nicely, I thought.
It has actually.
I think I've locked my husband out.
This bit will be on the recording as well, so the people that are listening who aren't here, we're sorry about this chat before we pop in.
Okay, so how do we pop in and out of the breakout rooms? That's the bit that I'm not 100% sure of. Does Faye do that?
I think it'll be Faye.
Okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
I will get her to stop the recording now though, because I think that'll be enough for the people that watch, because all of her now is the responses. So hope you find it useful if you're watching the recording. Faye, I think you're all right stopping the recording now. I think that'll be enough for those that couldn't make it today.
Yeah, okay.
And also they'll be able to hear this conversation, so
what's that? All right, okay, yeah.
They'll be able to hear us now.